The blood-stained telegram trembled in Katherine Newsom's hands as she stared out the frost-covered window at the barren winter landscape of 1872 Wyoming Territory, the words blurring through her tears as the reality set in that her husband was never coming home. Mama. 6-year-old Emma tugged at Katherine's skirt, her wide blue eyes filled with concern. "Why are you crying?" Katherine quickly wiped away her tears and knelt down to her daughter's eye level, forcing a smile that did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. Behind Emma stood her two brothers, 8-year-old Thomas with his father's serious expression and 3-year-old William clutching his worn stuffed bear. "Children," Katherine began, her voice breaking despite her best efforts, "I have some difficult news. Your father." There was an accident at the mine. Thomas stepped forward, his small shoulders squaring. "Pa's not coming back, is he?" Katherine shook her head, pulling her children into her arms as they began to understand. Their sobs pierced the silence of their small cabin, a sound more devastating than the howling winds outside. Jack Newsom had left 3 months earlier to work the winter season at a silver mine near Laramie, promising to return with enough money to get them through until spring. Their small homestead outside of Pinecrest had struggled after a poor harvest, and the mining job had been their last hope. Now Katherine found herself alone with 3 children as December's unforgiving cold settled across the Wyoming countryside. The wood pile outside their cabin was dwindling dangerously low, and the meager supplies in their root cellar wouldn't last the winter. Jack's final wages would take weeks to arrive if they came at all. That night, after tucking her exhausted children into bed, Katherine sat alone by the dying embers in the fireplace. The cabin had never felt so empty or so cold. She clutched Jack's old wool sweater around her shoulders and allowed herself the tears she'd been holding back for the children's sake. The weight of her new reality crashed down upon her, a widow at 26 with 3 young children to feed and a merciless Wyoming winter closing in. The nearest neighbor was miles away, the town of Pinecrest, a half-day's journey by wagon. Her parents were back east, too far to help even if they had the means. Katherine stared at the last flickering ember in the fireplace. "What am I going to do, Jack?" she whispered to the empty room. "How am I supposed to keep them safe without you?" The wind howled in response, rattling the windows as if to remind her just how precarious their situation truly was. Morning arrived with no answers, but brought with it a fresh blanket of snow and temperatures that plummeted further. Katherine rose before dawn, trembling as she dressed in layers of clothing before venturing outside to gather the last armful of firewood. The biting cold stung her face and crept through her gloves as she trudged through knee-deep snow. Inside, she started a small fire, careful to use only what was necessary. The children woke to a breakfast of thin porridge which Katherine served with forced cheerfulness. "Will we have Christmas, Mama?" Emma asked, her spoon scraping the bottom of her bowl. "Of course we will," Katherine answered, though she had no idea how she would manage even a modest celebration. "It might be different this year, but we'll still have Christmas." Thomas, always observant, glanced toward the nearly empty woodpile by the fireplace. "We're almost out of wood, aren't we?" Katherine nodded, seeing no point in hiding the truth from her eldest. "I'll figure something out, don't you worry." After breakfast, she bundled the children in every layer they owned and sent them outside to play in the snow, knowing the activity would keep them warm. Katherine used the time to take inventory of their supplies and face the harsh reality of their situation. The flour bin held less than a cup, the sugar was nearly gone, and they had just enough coffee for another week if she watered it down. The cellar contained some preserved vegetables and a small amount of salted pork. If carefully rationed, the food might last a month, but the firewood would be gone in days. Katherine placed her hand on her stomach, the gnawing hunger a reminder that she'd been eating less to ensure the children had enough. The mining company had promised to send Jack's final wages and a small death benefit, but who knew when that would arrive? Outside, she could hear her children's laughter as they built a snowman. The sound both warmed her heart and filled her with dread. How could she keep that laughter alive through the hardships ahead? As the short winter day began to wane, Katherine called the children inside. She was helping them remove their wet clothing when a sound outside caught her attention, the distant crunch of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart raced. They rarely had visitors, especially in winter. Could it be the company man with Jack's wages? Or perhaps someone bringing further bad news? "Thomas, watch your brother and sister," she instructed, grabbing Jack's old rifle from above the door before stepping onto the porch. Through the swirling snow, she made out the silhouette of a rider approaching on horseback, leading a second horse that pulled a small sled loaded with what appeared to be firewood. As the stranger drew closer, Katherine kept the rifle ready but lowered slightly. The rider stopped a respectful distance from the cabin and raised a gloved hand in greeting. "Mrs. Newsom," a deep voice called out. "Who's asking?" Katherine replied, not lowering the rifle. The man dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a scarf and the brim of his hat. "Name's Isaac Sullivan, madam. I work at the Rocking S Ranch over the ridge." He gestured to the sled behind him. "Heard about your husband from one of our hands who came back from Laramie. Thought you might be needing wood, what with the cold snap coming." Katherine stared at the sled piled high with split logs enough to last at least 2 weeks and felt tears spring to her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to appear weak before this stranger. That's very kind of you, Mr. Sullivan, but I can't accept charity." Isaac pulled down his scarf, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. His eyes, a striking shade of green, held no pity, only quiet understanding. "Not offering charity, madam. Just being a good neighbor." He paused, glancing at the nearly empty woodpile by the porch. "Besides, got more than we need at the ranch. This would just sit unused." Before Katherine could object further, the cabin door opened and Emma peered out, followed closely by Thomas and William. "Mama, who's that man?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Katherine hesitated, then slowly lowered the rifle. "This is Mr. Sullivan from the Rocking S. He's brought us some firewood." Isaac tipped his hat to the children. "Pleased to meet you, young uns." Thomas stepped forward protectively. "Are you here because of Pa?" A look of gentle understanding crossed Isaac's face. "I heard about your Pa. He was a good man. Wanted to make sure you all were taken care of with this weather turning." Katherine felt a lump in her throat. She and Jack had barely known anyone from the Rocking S Ranch, having only moved to the area 2 years ago. That someone would think of them in their time of need was unexpected. "We can pay you when my husband's wages arrive," Katherine offered. Isaac shook his head. "No need for payment, Mrs. Newsom. If you're worried about owing something, perhaps your boy there can help me unload this wood." Thomas straightened up, eager to help. "I can do that." Katherine nodded her permission, and Thomas hurried down the porch steps. William tried to follow, but Katherine held him back. "Why don't you two help me prepare some coffee for Mr. Sullivan?" she suggested to her younger children. "It's the least we can offer for his kindness." As they went inside, Katherine cast one last glance at Isaac Sullivan. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an absence of pretense that set him apart from other men she'd known. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Her husband had been gone less than a week. Such notions were inappropriate, especially now. Isaac and Thomas made short work of stacking the wood against the cabin wall, protected from the snow by the porch overhang. When they finished, Isaac accepted the offered cup of coffee with genuine gratitude, standing respectfully on the porch rather than presuming an invitation inside. "This is mighty fine coffee, Mrs. Newsom," he said after taking a sip. "Katherine," she corrected softly, "and it's nothing special, just grateful to still have some." Isaac nodded, understanding the subtext of her words. "Weather's supposed to turn even colder next week. I could come by with more wood if you'd allow it." Katherine wanted to refuse, to insist they would manage, but she thought of her children and swallowed her pride. "That would be very kind, Mr. Sullivan." "Isaac," he replied with a small smile. "Nobody calls me Mr. Sullivan except the banker in town." Despite everything, Katherine found herself returning his smile. "Isaac, then." As he prepared to leave, Isaac paused. "Mrs. Newsom, Katherine, if you need anything before I return, the rocking S is just over that northern ridge. About 5 miles as the crow flies." "Thank you, but we'll be fine," Katherine said, her natural independence reasserting itself. Isaac nodded, respecting her pride. "I'll be back in a few days with more wood." He tipped his hat and mounted his horse with the ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Katherine watched him ride away, the sled now empty behind his second horse. Only when he disappeared into the swirling snow did she realize she was still clutching the empty coffee cup in her hands, and that her children were watching her with curious expressions. "Is he going to be our friend now, Mama?" Emma asked. Katherine ushered them back inside. "Mr. Sullivan is being neighborly, that's all." But as she stoked the fire with wood that hadn't been there an hour earlier, Katherine couldn't help wondering about the cowboy who had appeared when they needed help most, and why her heart had lightened, just a little, at his promise to return. True to his word, Isaac Sullivan returned 3 days later with another sled of wood. This time he also brought a small sack of flour, some coffee, and a jar of preserved peaches. "From Mrs. Abernathy, our cook," he explained when Katherine began to protest. "Said no child should go without something sweet at Christmas." Katherine accepted the gifts with as much dignity as she could muster. "Please thank her for me." Isaac nodded, then glanced around the property. "If you don't mind my saying, there's some repairs needed on your barn roof before the next heavy snow. I could take a look at it." Katherine hesitated. The offer was tempting. The barn roof had been leaking even before Jack left for the mines, but accepting more help felt like admitting she couldn't manage on her own. "I wouldn't want to impose further," she said. Isaac removed his hat, revealing dark hair with the faintest touches of silver at the temples despite him appearing to be in his mid-30s. "Not an imposition. Winter's a slow time at the ranch. Boss gave some of us leave to help neighbors where needed." Something in his expression told Katherine he wasn't being entirely truthful about his reasons, but the practicality of having a sound barn roof won out over her pride. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she conceded. Isaac returned the following day with tools and materials, spending the entire day repairing not just the barn roof, but also a broken hinge on the chicken coop and a loose board on the cabin porch. Thomas followed him everywhere, eager to learn, and Katherine noticed how patiently Isaac explained each task to her son. When he finished, Katherine insisted he stay for supper, a modest stew she'd stretched with extra potatoes. "It's not much," she apologized as she served him at their small table. "Best meal I've had in months," Isaac replied, and though Katherine suspected it was far from true, his genuine appreciation was evident. During the meal, William overcame his shyness and climbed onto Isaac's lap, much to Katherine's embarrassment. "William, Mr. Sullivan is trying to eat," she scolded gently. "It's all right," Isaac said, balancing his bowl with one hand while supporting William with the other. "I don't mind." Katherine watched as her usually reserved youngest child snuggled comfortably against the cowboy's chest, and something stirred within her, a longing she immediately tried to suppress. Jack had only been gone 2 weeks. Such feelings were disloyal to his memory. After the children were in bed, Katherine walked Isaac to the door. "I don't know how to thank you for all your help." "No need for thanks," he said, pulling on his gloves. He paused, seeming to debate with himself before speaking again. "I lost my wife and daughter to fever 5 years ago. Know what it's like to feel the world's been pulled out from under you." Katherine's heart clenched at this revelation. "I'm so sorry." Isaac nodded, his eyes reflecting old pain. "Just wanted to say, it doesn't get easier exactly, but you learn to carry it, and you're stronger than you think." With that, he tipped his hat and left, leaving Katherine standing in the doorway with her thoughts in turmoil. It was the first time he'd shared something personal, and it changed how she saw him not just as a kind neighbor, but as someone who understood her pain in a way few others could. Over the next several weeks, Isaac became a regular visitor at the Newsom homestead. He always brought firewood and often some small provisions, a sack of potatoes, some dried apples, or a jar of honey. Katherine initially tried to keep track of everything to repay him when Jack's wages finally arrived, but Isaac waved away her attempts to discuss payment. "Consider it investment in good neighbors," he'd say. "Never know when I might need help myself." The children grew to anticipate his visits eagerly. Thomas particularly flourished under Isaac's guidance, learning practical skills as they worked on small projects around the homestead. Emma enjoyed the stories Isaac would tell about the ranch and his travels, while William simply wanted to be carried on Isaac's broad shoulders. For Katherine, Isaac's visits became a lifeline not just for the practical help he provided, but for the adult conversation and companionship she desperately missed. They would talk while working side by side, conversations flowing easily between them as though they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. She learned that Isaac had been born in Boston but left home at 17 to find his way west. He'd worked as a trail hand, a miner, and briefly as a sheriff's deputy before settling at the Rocking S Ranch 8 years ago. His wife, Sarah, and their 4-year-old daughter, Clara, had died during a scarlet fever outbreak that had swept through the area 5 years earlier. "Thought about moving on after that," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, the children already asleep, "but somehow never did." "I understand," Katherine replied softly. "This place, it holds Jack's dreams. I can't imagine leaving, even though sometimes it would be easier." Isaac studied her face in the firelight. "What were your dreams, Katherine, before all this?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a very long time. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted. "I taught at a small school in Illinois before I met Jack." He had such grand visions of building a life out west. She smiled at the memory. His enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself sharing his dreams, making them mine too. "You're still teaching," Isaac observed. "Seen you with your children, you've got a gift for it." His simple recognition of her identity beyond wife and mother touched something deep within Katherine. Jack had loved her dearly, but he'd never quite understood her longing to teach again someday. As January turned to February, the routine of Isaac's visits became a comfort Katherine hadn't known she needed. He typically came every third day, though sometimes more frequently if the weather was particularly harsh. On the rare occasions when heavy snow delayed his visit, she found herself watching the ridge anxiously until his familiar silhouette appeared. The arrival of Jack's final wages from the mining company brought complicated emotions. The small pouch of coins represented the last connection to her husband's work, the final fulfillment of his promises to provide for them. It wasn't much, but it would help them get through until spring, when Katherine planned to plant a larger garden than ever before. When Isaac arrived the day after the money came, Katherine met him on the porch with the pouch. "This is for all you've done," she said, holding it out to him. Isaac looked at the pouch but made no move to take it. "That's your husband's wages, meant for you and your children." "And we wouldn't have survived to use it without your help," Katherine insisted. "Please, Isaac, my pride has its limits, but my gratitude doesn't." A muscle worked in Isaac's jaw. "I didn't help you for payment, Katherine. I know that," she said softly, "but let me do this. For my own peace of mind." After a long moment, Isaac took the pouch, opened it, and removed a single coin far less than what his help had been worth. "This'll do," he said, handing the rest back, "but only if you'll agree to something in return." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Let me take you and the children to town on Saturday. There's a social at the church. Would do you all good to see some folks, have a proper meal that someone else cooked." The idea of appearing in public as a new widow, of facing the curious eyes and well-meaning but often painful condolences, made Katherine's stomach tighten. But the children had been cooped up for weeks and they deserved some joy. All right, she agreed. For the children's sake. Isaac's smile was worth the anxiety the decision caused her. I'll come by mid-morning. Roads should be clear enough for the wagon. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the February sun creating a dazzling landscape of sparkling snow. Katherine spent the morning helping the children dress in their best clothes, faded but clean, and trying to tame her own appearance. It had been weeks since she'd given much thought to how she looked, focused as she'd been on mere survival. She put on her one good dress, a deep blue wool that Jack had always admired, and pinned her hair up more carefully than usual. When she caught Thomas watching her, she felt a flash of guilt. "Is it wrong for me to dress nicely?" she asked her son when the younger children were distracted. Thomas considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. "Pa would want you to look pretty, I think." His simple wisdom brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Thomas." When Isaac arrived with the wagon, Katherine noticed he too had made an effort with his appearance. His usually tousled hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and he wore a clean shirt under his heavy coat. "You look lovely, Katherine," he said simply as he helped her into the wagon. The journey to Pinecrest took nearly 2 hours, but the children's excitement made it seem shorter. Isaac pointed out landmarks along the way, telling stories that had even Katherine laughing despite her nervousness about facing the town. Pinecrest was small by any standard, a single main street with a church, general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. The social was being held in the church meeting hall, where tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by families from town and surrounding homesteads. Katherine felt eyes turn toward them as they entered. Though she'd met some of these people during their infrequent trips to town, she'd always been at Jack's side. Now she entered as a widow, accompanied by the Rocking S ranch foreman whose reputation as a solitary figure was well known, the minister's wife, Mrs. Porter, approached immediately, enveloping Katherine in a hug that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. "My dear, we've all been so worried about you and these precious children," she said. "When Isaac told us he'd convince you to come today, I was delighted." Katherine glanced at Isaac, who was already being drawn into conversation with some of the ranch hands. So he'd planned this ahead of time. The afternoon passed more pleasantly than Katherine had anticipated. The children gorged themselves on home-cooked food and played games with the town children. Katherine found herself surrounded by women who offered practical advice on widowhood rather than mere sympathy. "My Harold's been gone 3 years now," confided Mrs. Simmons, a stout woman with kind eyes. "First winter's the hardest. Come spring, you plant your garden and find your way forward." Throughout it all, Isaac maintained a respectful distance, but Katherine was aware of his watchful presence. He seemed to sense when the conversations became too much, appearing at her side with a cup of coffee, or to relay something amusing one of the children had said. As the social wound down and families began to depart, Mrs. Porter pulled Katherine aside. "The school committee was just discussing the need for a teacher come spring," she said. "Our last one left to get married in December. Might you be interested? It wouldn't be much pay, but—" Katherine's heart leapt at the possibility. I was a teacher before I married." "Perfect, Mrs. Porter beamed. "Let me speak to the committee. It would only be 3 days a week, but it would help." On the journey home, with the children drowsy from excitement and food, Katherine told Isaac about the teaching possibility. "Would be good for you," he said, his eyes on the road ahead. "You've got a natural way with learning." "It would mean leaving the children some days," Katherine worried. "Thomas could mind himself, but Emma and William." "Mrs. Abernathy at the ranch has been saying she misses having little ones underfoot," Isaac offered. "She'd likely be happy to watch them while you teach. She used to do it for some of the hands' wives." Katherine studied his profile in the fading light. "You've already thought this through, haven't you?" The corner of Isaac's mouth quirked up. might have mentioned to Mrs. Porter that you were once a teacher. Isaac Sullivan, Katherine said, trying to sound stern but failing. Are you orchestrating my life? He turned to her then, his expression serious despite his small smile. Just trying to help you find your way back to it. The simple truth in his words silenced any objection she might have made. Since Jack's death, she'd been surviving, not living. Isaac seemed determined to help her do both. As February melted into March, the grip of winter began to loosen. The snow receded, revealing mud and the first tentative green shoots. Isaac's visits continued with the same regularity, though the need for firewood had diminished. He found other reasons to stop by helping clear winter debris from the garden plot, mending fences damaged by snow, or simply bringing news from town. Katherine secured the teaching position, starting after Easter. As Isaac had predicted, Mrs. Abernathy was delighted to watch Emma and William on school days. Thomas insisted on attending school with his mother, proudly carrying her books and papers. Life began to settle into a new rhythm different from before, but no longer merely about survival. Katherine found joy in teaching again, in watching her children thrive despite their loss, and in the quiet evenings when Isaac would stop by after she returned from town. They never spoke directly about the subtle shift in their relationship. There was nothing improper in their interactions, always in the presence of the children, always with the door open when he visited. Yet Katherine found herself anticipating his arrivals with an eagerness that both thrilled and troubled her. It had been just 3 months since Jack's death. Was it disloyal to feel her heart quickening at the sound of another man's horse approaching? To find herself taking extra care with her appearance on days when Isaac might visit? These questions plagued her one evening in late March as she sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air held the promise of spring, still cool but lacking winter's bite. Isaac had helped her split wood that afternoon, no longer for immediate need, but to build up a store for the next winter, and now sat beside her, whittling a small wooden horse for William. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing her distant expression. Katherine sighed. "They're probably not worth that much." Isaac continued his careful carving, giving her space to either share or keep her silence. That was one of the things she'd come to appreciate about him. He never pushed, never demanded. "I was thinking about Jack," she admitted finally, wondering what he would think of everything. Isaac's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "He'd be proud of how you've managed. How you've cared for your children." "Yes, but..." Katherine hesitated, unsure how to express her confusion. "It's been only 3 months, Isaac. Sometimes I feel like I don't know, moving forward too quickly." Isaac set down his carving and turned to face her directly. "There's no proper timeline for grief, Katherine. No rulebook that says you must suffer exactly this long before you're allowed to smile again." "Some might disagree," she said softly, thinking of the occasional whispers she'd overheard in town when she and Isaac arrived together for church or school functions. "Some folks will always find reason to talk," Isaac replied, his voice taking on an edge. "Same ones probably thought Jack was foolish to try homesteading out here in the first place." That was true enough. Many in town had predicted the Newsoms would fail, especially after their first difficult winter. Jack had proven them wrong through sheer determination, though their existence had remained precarious. "If Jack were here," Isaac continued carefully, "what would he want for you and the children?" The question cut through her confusion. Jack had always put their happiness first, working himself to exhaustion to provide for them, ultimately dying in pursuit of the means to keep them secure. "He'd want us to be happy," she said, certainty replacing doubt. "To not just survive, but to live well." Isaac nodded, returning to his carving. "Then honor him by doing exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, stars emerging one by one. When Isaac finally rose to leave, he placed the finished wooden horse in her hands. "Almost forgot Easter's coming," he said. "Would you and the children like to join me for dinner at the ranch? Mrs. Abernathy's been planning it for weeks. The invitation shouldn't have surprised Katherine. They'd spent many meals together over the past months, but something about it felt different. Perhaps it was the setting, away from her cabin and the constant reminders of Jack, or perhaps it was the holiday itself, with its themes of rebirth and new beginnings. "We'd like that very much," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. Easter Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day. Katherine dressed the children in their best clothes, which now included new ribbons for Emma's hair and a small wooden bow tie Isaac had carved for Thomas to wear with his shirt. The Rocking S Ranch was larger than Katherine had imagined, with a substantial main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings spread across a valley backed by pine-covered hills. As they approached in the wagon Isaac had sent for them, driven by a friendly young ranch hand named Pete, Katherine felt a flutter of nervousness. "Look, Mama," Emma exclaimed, pointing to a paddock where several young colts frolicked in the sunshine. The main house was a two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Isaac waited for them there, dressed in clean dark trousers and a white shirt that made his tanned skin appear even darker. "Welcome to the Rocking S," he said, lifting William into his arms with practiced ease while helping Katherine down from the wagon. Inside, they were greeted by the delicious aromas of roasting meat and baking bread. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump woman with iron gray hair and a ready smile, embraced Katherine like an old friend. "About time he brought you all out here," she said, shooting Isaac a meaningful look that made him clear his throat uncomfortably. The ranch owner, Samuel Stanton, was an older gentleman with a dignified bearing who welcomed them warmly. "Isaac speaks very highly of you, Mrs. Newsom, your children too. We're delighted to have you join our Easter celebration." The day passed in a pleasant blur of good food, new acquaintances, and the children's delight at exploring the ranch. Isaac gave them a tour, showing Thomas the blacksmith shop, letting Emma help collect eggs from the henhouse, and taking William for a short ride on a gentle mare. Throughout it all, Katherine observed Isaac in this environment, respected by the hands, trusted by his employer, completely at ease in a way she hadn't fully seen before. This was his world, and he had invited her into it. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, Katherine found herself sitting with Isaac on a bench beneath a massive old cottonwood tree, watching the children playing with some of the ranch hands' children. "They've had a wonderful day," she said. "Thank you for inviting us." Isaac's smile contained something she hadn't seen before, a hopefulness that made her heart beat faster. "Could be more days like this," he said quietly, "if you wanted." Katherine understood he was offering something significant, though the exact nature remained unspoken. "Isaac." "Not asking for answers today," he assured her quickly. "Just something to think about." Before she could respond, William came running over, demanding to show his mother a frog he'd found. The moment passed, but Isaac's words lingered in Katherine's mind during the journey home and in the days that followed. Spring brought a flurry of activity to the homestead. Katherine expanded the garden significantly, with Isaac's help breaking the new ground. She began teaching 3 days a week, finding fulfillment in sharing knowledge with the dozen students who attended the small Pinecrest school. The children flourished with the change of seasons. Thomas took on more responsibilities around the homestead, proudly learning to care for the animals. Emma's natural sociability blossomed as she made friends at church and during visits to the ranch. Even William seemed to grow an inch overnight, his baby features giving way to a little boy's curiosity about everything. Through it all, Isaac remained a steady presence. His visits were no longer about survival, but about building something new. Together they repaired the chicken coop, expanded the garden fence, and planted apple saplings along the south side of the property. "Won't bear fruit for years," Katherine observed as they worked the soil around the tiny trees. "Worth the wait," Isaac replied, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary. In quiet moments, Katherine allowed herself to acknowledge that her feelings for Isaac had grown beyond gratitude or friendship. His kindness, his patience with the children, the quiet strength he offered without demanding anything in return, all had worked their way into her heart. Yet she hesitated to put a name to these feelings or to speak of them aloud. It seemed too soon, too complicated. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, Katherine finally broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "People in town are talking," she said, her hands busy with mending, "about us." Isaac leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs before him. "Been talking since February. Doesn't make much difference to me what they say." "It matters for the children," Katherine countered. "And for my position at the school." Isaac nodded, acknowledging her point. "What exactly are they saying that concerns you?" Katherine set down her sewing. "That it's inappropriate, my receiving regular visits from a bachelor, that I've forgotten Jack too quickly." A muscle worked in Isaac's jaw. "And what do you think, Katherine?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. I think Jack would understand. He'd want me to accept help to find happiness again." She paused, gathering courage. "But it's complicated, Isaac. I have the children to consider. And memories that still hurt some days." "I'm not asking you to forget him," Isaac said gently. "Never would." "Then what are you asking?" Katherine's voice was barely above a whisper. Isaac reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Asking if there might be room in your heart for new memories alongside the old ones. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday." The simple honesty of his words brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "I think there already is," she admitted, "but I'm afraid, Isaac, of depending on someone again, of risking that kind of loss." "Life's full of risk," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Can't avoid it, can only choose which ones are worth taking." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands joined, the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. Finally, Isaac stood, reluctantly releasing her hand. "I should go, getting late." Katherine walked with him to where his horse waited. Under the silver light of the half-moon, Isaac turned to her. "I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings," he said, his voice low. "But I want you to know that what I feel for you and those children isn't passing or convenient. It's taken root, like those apple trees we planted." Before Katherine could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her composure. "Good night, Katherine," he said, mounting his horse. She watched him ride away, her heart pounding with the significance of what had transpired. Not a declaration of love exactly, not a proposal, but a promise of possibility. The following weeks brought new challenges. A late spring storm damaged part of the garden, requiring replanting. William developed a fever that kept Katherine awake for 3 nights. The school committee questioned whether she could continue teaching in the fall if enrollment increased as expected. Through each challenge, Isaac was there, not taking over but supporting, offering practical help and quiet encouragement. Katherine found herself increasingly turning to him for advice, valuing his perspective and the way he considered problems from all angles. By early June, Katherine realized that Isaac had become essential to their lives in ways that went far beyond the firewood he'd first brought on that winter day. The children looked for him daily, disappointed on the rare occasions when ranch work kept him away. Thomas spoke of him constantly, proudly showing off new skills Isaac had taught him. Emma had taken to drawing pictures for him, carefully saving them until his next visit. William simply climbed into his lap whenever possible, as comfortable with Isaac as he'd been with his father, and Katherine. Katherine found herself watching the northern ridge each afternoon, her heart lifting at the sight of his approaching horse. She caught herself imagining a future that included Isaac not replacing Jack, but building something new that honored the past while embracing what could be. The opportunity to speak of these feelings came unexpectedly one Sunday after church. The children had run off to play with friends, leaving Katherine and Isaac momentarily alone in the shade of a large oak tree in the churchyard. Mrs. Porter mentioned the school might need you full-time come fall, Isaac said. That's good news, Katherine nodded. If I can manage it with the children and the homestead. Been thinking about that, Isaac said, his tone carefully casual though Katherine sensed underlying tension. About how to make things easier for you all. Oh, Katherine prompted when he didn't continue. Isaac removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Katherine, I've not been entirely honest about my situation, alarm flickered through her. What do you mean? I'm not just the foreman at Rocking S, he said. I'm Samuel's nephew. He's getting on in years, has no children of his own. Been grooming me to take over the ranch for the past 3 years. This revelation surprised Katherine. Why didn't you tell me? At first it didn't seem important, Isaac explained. Later, I wanted to be sure that whatever grew between us wasn't influenced by circumstances. Katherine understood his meaning. A foreman was respected but still an employee. The future owner of one of the largest ranches in the territory was a very different prospect. I see, she said, unsure how to respond. Isaac stepped closer, his expression earnest. Nothing's changed about how I feel, Katherine. I just wanted you to know the full truth before I asked what I came to ask. Katherine's pulse quickened. And what's that? I love you, he said simply. Have for months now. Love your children too, as if they were my own. I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife, bringing your family to join mine at the ranch. Though she had begun to anticipate something like this, the reality of his proposal still took her breath away. Isaac, don't answer right away, he said quickly. Take time to think, to talk with the children. I know it's been less than 6 months since Jack passed. If you need more time, I understand. Katherine studied his face, the face that had become so dear to her. The face her children looked for, that she herself looked for each day. I don't need more time, she said softly. The children adore you and she took a deep breath. I love you too, Isaac. It happened so gradually I hardly noticed until it was already there, as natural as breathing. The hope that dawned in his eyes warmed her to her core. Is that a yes? Katherine nodded, tears of joy pricking her eyes. It's a yes. Isaac gathered her hands in his, mindful of the public setting even as his expression conveyed the depth of his feelings. We'll take it slowly, do right by the children. I was thinking perhaps late summer, give everyone time to adjust to the idea. That sounds perfect, Katherine agreed. As if on cue, the children came running back, William launching himself at Isaac's legs while Emma and Thomas followed more sedately. Children, Katherine said, gathering them close. Mr. Sullivan and I have something important to discuss with you. They shared the news over ice cream at the small cafe in town. Thomas listened solemnly, asking practical questions about what would happen to their homestead and his father's things. Emma was immediately enthusiastic, already planning what her room at the ranch might look like. William simply asked if Isaac's horse could live with them too, which made everyone laugh. So you're going to be our new pa? Thomas asked finally, his young face serious. Isaac met his gaze directly. Not replacing your father, Thomas, he'll always be your pa. But yes, I'd be honored to be a father to you if you'll have me. Thomas considered this, then nodded decisively. Pa would like you. He always said to look after Mama and the little ones. You've been doing that. Katherine blinked back tears at her son's simple wisdom. News of their engagement spread quickly through Pinecrest. Most reactions were positive after all. A widow with 3 children faced difficult prospects, and Isaac Sullivan was well respected. A few raised eyebrows at the timing, but Katherine found she cared less about such judgments than she once had. They set the wedding for mid-August, when the worst heat of summer would be past, but before the busy fall season began at the ranch. Katherine continued teaching through June, then focused on preparing for the transition. She would lease the homestead to a young couple just arrived from Pennsylvania, ensuring Jack's hard work wouldn't go to waste. Each evening, as summer's long twilight settled over the land, Katherine and Isaac would sit on the porch planning their future while the children played in the yard. They decided Katherine would continue teaching in the fall, with Mrs. Abernathy helping with the younger children on school days. Thomas would take on small responsibilities at the ranch, learning alongside Isaac. They would honor Jack's memory by maintaining the family plot on the homestead and visiting regularly. "Think you'll be happy at the ranch?" Isaac asked one evening, a rare moment of uncertainty crossing his face. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, watching her children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Happiness isn't just about place," she said. "It's about who you share it with." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that seems to stretch endlessly. The ceremony was held at the Pinecrest Church, followed by a celebration at the Rocking S Ranch that brought together townsfolk, ranch hands, and neighboring homesteaders. Katherine wore a new dress of ivory silk, a luxury she would once have considered impractical, but that Isaac had insisted upon. Emma served as her attendant, proudly carrying a basket of wildflowers. Thomas stood tall beside Isaac, while William, to everyone's amusement, insisted on standing between the bride and groom, holding one hand of each. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Porter, his voice carrying across the flower-decked porch of the main house where the ceremony was conducted. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony and to celebrate the joining of two families into one." As she spoke her vows, Katherine felt Jack's memory as a gentle presence, not a shadow over this new beginning, but a part of what had shaped her into the woman now promising her love to Isaac. She saw in Isaac's eyes his understanding of this, his respect for the past even as they committed to their future. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Porter concluded. "Mr. Sullivan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, appropriate for public view, yet conveying the depth of feeling between them. As they turned to face their guests, now officially a family, Katherine caught sight of her children's beaming faces and felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing in the large barn cleared for the occasion. Katherine found herself passed from partner to partner as neighbors and friends offered congratulations, but her eyes always sought Isaac, finding him similarly engaged but watching for her. When they finally managed to meet in the middle of a dance, Isaac pulled her close, propriety now allowing the proximity they'd both been careful to avoid before. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "Completely," she answered truthfully. Later, after the children had fallen asleep in their new rooms at the ranch, exhausted from excitement and celebration, Katherine and Isaac stood on the porch of what was now their home. Stars blanketed the summer sky, crickets sang in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. "Hard to believe it's been only 8 months since you first appeared with that sled of firewood," Katherine mused, her head resting against Isaac's shoulder. Isaac's arm tightened around her. "Knew that day there was something special about you and those children. Couldn't stay away if I'd tried." "I'm glad you didn't," Katherine said, tilting her face up to his. His kiss was no longer constrained by public propriety, deep and tender and promising more to come. When they finally parted, breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Katherine," he whispered. 5 years later, the Sullivan Ranch house buzzed with activity as Katherine directed preparations for Christmas dinner. At 31, she had settled comfortably into her role as ranch mistress while maintaining her position at the Pinecrest School, now expanded to a proper building with 2 classrooms. "Mama, can I take the pies to the dining room?" asked 10-year-old Emma, eager to help. "Careful, they're still hot," Katherine cautioned, wiping flour from her hands. Thomas, now 13 and showing signs of the man he would become, carried in an armload of firewood without being asked, stacking it neatly by the large stone fireplace. At 8, William was tasked with setting the long dining table, a job he performed with exaggerated care under his sister's supervision. The newest additions to the family, twin boys James and Joseph, toddled after their older siblings, 3-year-old bundles of energy that kept everyone on their toes. "Everyone decent in here," called Isaac from the doorway, stamping snow from his boots. "Got visitors arriving." Behind him came Samuel Stanton, now using a cane but still sharp of mind, followed by Mrs. Abernathy and several of the longtime ranch hands who had no families of their own and always joined the Sullivans for holiday meals. Katherine moved to Isaac's side, accepting his kiss as he removed his coat. "Everything ready outside. All set," he confirmed with a wink that the children couldn't see. Christmas dinner was a lively affair, with multiple conversations happening at once and frequent laughter. Katherine surveyed the table with quiet satisfaction. Her family had grown in ways she could never have imagined during that desperate winter when Jack died. After the meal, as twilight gathered, Isaac announced it was time for a surprise. The children bundled into coats and boots, practically vibrating with excitement as they were led to the barn. Inside, lit by lanterns that cast a warm glow, stood a sleigh freshly painted red with green trim, hitched to 2 of the ranch's steadiest horses. A sleigh ride. Emma exclaimed, clapping her gloved hands. "Your mother mentioned missing the sleigh rides her family took when she was a girl back east," Isaac explained, helping Katherine onto the seat while the children scrambled aboard. "Thought we might start our own tradition." As they glided across the snow-covered pastures of the rocking S, bells jingling and children singing carols at the top of their lungs, Katherine leaned against her husband's solid warmth. "Thank you," she said, knowing he would understand she meant for more than just the sleigh. Isaac smiled down at her, the same smile that had first offered hope when all seemed lost. "Just bringing firewood, Katherine. Never stopped, never will." Katherine tucked her hand in his, surrounded by the family they had built together, and knew with absolute certainty that the cold of that desperate winter was behind her forever, replaced by the enduring warmth of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into a life more beautiful than she could have imagined.